I'm going to do it that way. This is the way I know Ron Blackwater likes this method. Okay. And if you have your little pointy pliers, take a look at that bead. One side is going to have a much, much larger opening than the other. You want to put this bead on the small side over the point, not the large side over the point. So I'm just going to lay that up here, lay it on, then I'm going to remove my hook, let that slide down, then I'm going to mount the hook like I normally would if I were going to be tying. Now, I put out 1500ths lead, which is a little bit smaller than 2000ths. I like to use 1500ths because it's not so heavy. I don't want it to sink like a rock. I still want to be able to work it, but I'm going to lay that behind, and I'm going to wrap, I don't know, 10 or 12 wraps. Then I'm going to break that off, and I'm going to slide that lead so it fits in the back side of that bead. If you put the wrong side on your hook, you'll not be able to get that lead through the small eye. You want the small end of that bead toward the eye of the hook. And then I'm going to kind of wrap the rest of that lead around and get it kind of neatly on the hook. Okay? Then I'm going to lay a thread base. I'm going to start back at the, right about at the bend of the hook. Overwrap, and then I'm going to go forward. And like we mentioned before, once you hit that lead, your thread is just going to, it'll just follow. But I just want to make sure it's not going to slide around on the hook. And I'm going to back up, and I'm going to leave my bobbin hanging right over where the bend would be. And then I'm going to get rid of my tag end. Okay?
How much lead do you put there?
10, 12 wraps.
Okay.
Okay? Now I'm going to tie this one black. This marabou is pretty nice stuff. It's woolly bugger marabou as opposed to quill marabou. Some of that's an individual feather, and I mentioned it's an under feather off the breast of a turkey, and it's dyed a variety of colors. I'm going to peel some of that back. And one thing I've noticed that beginning tiers have a problem with proportion. Take a look at your hook shank. For me, the length of the hook is about the width of my little finger. Your little finger may be too big, it may be too small, whatever. But I want my marabou to hang back past the bend about the length of that shaft, which for me is about the width of my finger. So if I put this on, that obviously is way, way too much, right? Yeah. So I'm going to move that forward to where it's about what I think is about the length of my finger, and I'm going to lay that right above where I'm going to tie, and I'm going to go over with just a couple of loose wraps. Now that's pretty close. It might be a tad long, but it's pretty close. If you have it way too long, if you only put a couple wraps, you can pull that marabou plume forward a little bit to get it just about where you want it. So if you keep pinching that plume while you're wrapping, it will not rotate on the hook for you. If you try to tie that in without hanging onto that plume and holding it against the hook, it's probably going to rotate on you. So I'm just going to go forward until I get to about where my lead is, and I'm going to get rid of all that extra marabou. It's a little bit fuzzy, so I'm going to try and tie that down a little bit. I have to end up back above the barb of the hook anyway, so I've got I've got my marabou tied in. It's pretty close to the length I want it, which is about, for me, about the width of my finger. You have to do it your own test, whatever works for you. Next thing I want to put on is my flashabou. So I've got, some of this stuff comes in really long strands. Those two pieces, if you bend them in the middle, they should be long enough to extend back past your marabou plume so that you can trim it. So, a couple of ways to do this. I can lay two pieces on this side and tie it in. And then I can lift that up and over and attach it so it's coming out the opposite side. That's probably the quick and easiest way. And then I'm going to trim the excess. You should have some flashabou that is on both sides. Now, this one kind of dropped on me. It's adjustable at this point. If it dropped down a little low on you, just grab it and pull it up into place, and you can get it just about exactly where you want it. Okay, now is when you need a piece of a copper wire, gold wire. I'm going to take my gold wire, I'm going to lay it on the side of the hook, and I'm going to try to get it on the top of the hook. I don't want to get it up behind the eye. That'll just cause some problems. And notice I'm pulling it down so that it's kind of in the middle of the fly facing me.
I'm doing the same thing.
Okay, can you see that? It's kind of in the middle of the fly, but it's facing me. So I'm going to get that out of my way. Taking the pointy end, I'm going to grab the tip of that, and I'm going to try and just fold these barbs back. I'm doing that so they're going to be out of the way when I tie this onto my hook shank. Okay?
No, I'm okay on that.
And you should end up with something, get some barbs out of the way. I'm going to trim that off because I don't need all that. And I'm going to tie that on right at the bend. Make sure you've got it attached securely, because if you start wrapping and it pulls out, you're probably going to say naughty words. Okay? And I'm going to keep my thread right back where I'm going to be tying on. The last thing that we're going to tie on is the first thing we're going to wrap, and that's this chenille. If you have, I have a piece of pretty thick chenille. If you have thinner chenille, you may want to lay that chenille on to give the body a little bit more thickness, but mine is thick enough that I don't think I'm going to mess with that. So I'm going to peel some of that off so I have a couple little threads there. And that's where I'm going to tie it on, with those little threads, right at the bend. All these things should be tied at almost identical location, right above the barb. If you tie them too far forward, you're going to have a problem. Your body is going to be very short, and it's going to look a little weird. When you've got all this material now tied on, I'm going to wrap forward. And I'm going to half hitch behind the gold bead, and I'm going to get my thread out of the way. Everybody pretty much caught up? The first thing we're going to wrap forward is the last thing we tied on. That's our chenille. So I'm going to notice I'm right over the barb. Or excuse me, right over where the back of the barb would be. And I'm just going to wrap that forward. Next clue is, if you wrap too far forward, I've got the bead completely buried here. That's too far. You want to be able to see the bead and bring your bobbin up, bring it over, drop it right behind the bead a couple of 2 or 3 times. Now your chenille is not going to go anywhere, and you can trim that extra off on top of your fly. Okay? And I'm going to make just a couple little wraps for security.
This out of the way.
I need it now.
Is this enough?
Okay? Ready to wrap your hackle forward. If you get ahead of me, don't mess with that gold wire until I give you a pointer or two. All right, I'm going to be palmering my hackle forward. I want a good fly, the wraps will be equally distant from each other. And when I get it up back behind the bead again, I'm going to bring it over, drop it 2 or 3 times, and then I'm going to nip that excess hackle. Try to get only the center of the stem, nothing that you've wrapped. That'll keep your hackle full. And you can see I've got some of those strands that are leaning forward. I'm going to grab those, my fingers, move them back, and I'm going to try and wrap over those so that they stay back. I don't know where that one came from. That's a shorty. I'm going to get rid of that. Okay. And I'm going to half hitch this again. I do not put wire on all of my woolies, but I wanted to show you this because it's kind of an optional, but it will very much strengthen your fly. The key to this is, you notice when I wrapped the hackle on, I was wrapping away from myself. When you're going to put the gold wire on, this is one of the few times where you do not wrap away from yourself. If you wrap forward, hold it tight, and you got to just kind of, I'm just going to wiggle it because I don't want to mash down any of my hackle. I'm just wiggling that, and I'm counter wrapping that. I'm wrapping over each one of the hackle wraps by doing this. And it's locking those in place so that if a fish hits that and decides to tear that up, then I'm not going to lose the entire fly. Although I will tell you this, I have had hackle break and have it hanging behind the marabou, and I've caught fish with it. Now, why that works, I don't know. I guess that
Did you say
It's a horse of a different color.
wire towards you or what?
you want it towards you, just opposite of all the golden rules about wrapping away. When you get it up front, I'm going to try and get it tied off.
Sounds kind of like the rest of mine.
And try and nip that off. I normally keep one pair of scissors that I use only to cut metal, because it will dull the tips of your scissors. If you do a lot of metal cutting. Now the last step is just to whip finish. I'm going to, I can see that my wire is sticking up a little bit. You probably can't see it there. I'm going to try and bend it down a little bit. Okay. And we'll finish that, I want to do more time to make sure.
Tiny woolly buggers, those are a mess.
Yes. I don't want it to call.
And that is a, you may or may not like the fact that the gold wire gives it a little bit more sparkle. I think you can maybe see that. My wraps are pretty crappy. The wire wraps ought to be as evenly spaced as the hackle wraps. But that's a very durable fly.